how to transfer your workplace pension to a SIPP. So if you're watching this video, you've probably already started your research journey and understood that maybe you'd like to have more control over how your money is being invested in comparison to your workplace scheme. Or possibly you already have a SIPP and you want to consolidate your existing workplace scheme into your SIPP or maybe a former workplace scheme. So the process of the actual physical transfer in the United Kingdom now as a UK resident, if you're working with a modern workplace scheme and you're working with a modern SIPP provider such as AJ Bell, the physical transfer process now is actually quite simple. What's much more important before that though is the advice process and how it works. Now just to comment on that, as a non-UK resident, the actual transfer process is far more complex because the UK government deems that you need to have more security and more questions and more documents to go through to make sure that you're not being taken advantage of. And to be honest, the reason for that is because the quality of financial advice outside of the UK typically sucks. When it comes to UK pension transfers, in the UK, FCA regulation simply doesn't allow that. Outside of the UK, people are working with advisors from all over the planet who are not regulated to the same degree as the FCA. Sorry for that side point. Okay, so one of the most important things you need to do is a full analysis of your existing workplace scheme or your former workplace scheme versus the SIPP. So for example, what is the underlying portfolio of your existing plan? What is the 5-year performance? What level of risk is being taken? What is the volatility of the underlying portfolio? Is it in line with your current risk profile? Or is it in line with your attitude to risk and what you want to achieve for your retirement? Typically speaking, in a workplace scheme, your workplace is obviously limited. They can't send an independent financial advisor to everybody's office. Well, they could if they wanted to, but it'd be too expensive for them. So generally speaking, they pull people into certain sets. You might have filled out a form somewhere in the past time to work out your risk profile. For a lot of clients though that I've met, they've never filled out a risk profile form with their workplace scheme. As such, their money is just kind of being invested similarly to everyone else in the company without really a direct plan, which is in relation to themselves. So somebody might be conservative, another person might be adventurous. Generally speaking, with your finances, you want to be in control. It's your money. You're better off to have a more direct input and control over how that money is being invested. Now, once you've done all the analysis, which is basically our job here at Cameron James, you could go and request all this information from your seeding scheme in the UK or existing workplace pension, but you wouldn't really know what to do with the data, how to compare it, or potentially what portfolio you should be using next. At Cameron James, we put all this together for you in a 35-page document for free, if it's a defined contribution scheme, to outline to you how it compares to the SIPP provider that we recommend you to transfer to. And again, what are the costs? What is the protection? What is the 5-year performance? What is the risk? How has the portfolio performed over a 5-year period? What are the expected level of returns in the future? Even though past performance is no guide to future performance, different risk-rated portfolios have grown at a different rate over the course of time because the higher the risk profile, the higher level of equity weighting, long-term trend of equity markets has been up. Of course, no one can guarantee that in the future, but that has been what the markets have done over the past 50 and 100 years. Now, what's very important, if you have an existing workplace scheme, you typically speaking, or it's typically highly advisable 99% of the time to keep your existing workplace scheme open for your existing employer and employee tax efficient contributions, possibly salary sacrifice if you're trying to keep yourself below thresholds and tax bandings for contributions to go into. So you might be asking, but hang on, I think you're talking about transferring out. This is what's called a partial transfer. The majority of workplace schemes allow a partial transfer and request for you to keep the minimum balance, often say £1,000 in the account. So let's break it down. Say you have a salary of, I actually got a real life example from last week, one of my clients. Salary, £146,000 gross. My client hates paying tax, doesn't want to be over the 100k tax threshold when you start losing your personal allowance, etc., once you get to 110, blah, blah, blah. So he's doing £46,000 salary sacrifice each year into his pension scheme so he doesn't go over the 100k bracket. So in his example, what we're doing at the moment is we're running an analysis of his existing workplace scheme, which has 120 grand in it. They actually already hold a SIPP with me with $500,000. So we're looking at the 120 grand in his existing workplace scheme. We'll be putting together a recommendation report for transferring out £119,000 But in order for us to be able to advise on the transfer out, we have to be able to clearly show that it's beneficial for him to do so. And that means looking at the 5-year performance, looking at the risk, looking at everything about his existing workplace scheme in comparison to, we could call it his main SIPP with us at the moment, and is it beneficial for him to do so, including obviously the initial charge that needs to be paid in order to complete the transfer. For anyone who's not familiar, on the cost section of our website, we have a 1% charge for any portfolio transfers initial over 1 million, a 2% charge between 250 and a million, and a 3% charge for any portfolios below £250,000. So it gives you an idea of the initial cost. We have to outline all of that in a recommendation report as an FCA-regulated firm for UK residents, and for non-UK residents, we still follow the same best practice of clearly outlining to the pound and the penny what our initial charges are in comparison to the potential benefits of what you could have by completing the transfer out. Now, just to clarify, if you have any former workplace pension schemes, you do not need to worry about keeping the scheme open because you don't need to make any future contributions there. That pension pot is effectively frozen. There's no more employee or employer contributions. Those old workplace schemes can just be transferred to a SIPP, but you still need to go through the analysis and advice process as to whether or not it's in your best interest to do so. Now, we must have done 300 DC recommendation reports in the UK over the past couple of years. I would say in 99% of the time, it was advisable for the client to transfer to SIPP and have access to manage the money with ourselves with an updated low-cost portfolio. And that's another thing I haven't really focused on here is cost. Inside a lot of workplace schemes, it's very, very rare to see workplace schemes by default using low-cost passive tracker strategies inside the funds. Typically speaking, they might be working with a DFM, or a DFM has come into that company and said, we will manage the money for you. Your clients will pay, or your employees will pay 0.75% on the underlying fund. This is our glossy brochure, blah, 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 blah. So very often it's actually almost cheaper to complete a transfer out of your existing workplace scheme plus our 1% ongoing advisory fee. From an ongoing perspective, the cost differential is actually sometimes marginal. Say they're paying 0.75% to a DFM that they never meet, they never get any financial advice from, but who's managing their portfolio in the background. The majority of active fund managers have underperformed the market, long-term statistics there. So very often you're paying 0.75% to underperform the market, and you're paying a privilege to do so, in comparison to, say, paying 1% ongoing for a financial advisor who is actually able to help you with all areas of your financial planning. For me, personally, I'm biased, I'm CEO of Cameron James. I think paying 1% as an example for a good financial advisor, doing cash flow modeling, annual forward planning meetings, looking out for you and your family, ISAs, JISAs, inheritance tax planning, what else do you need to be working on, is potentially more valuable than paying, say, 0.7% or 70 basis points to a DFM that you've actually never met before. Now, that doesn't mean to say every single workplace pension scheme in the UK uses a DFM, but it is an example. And I must say that in some of the more modern UK workplace pension schemes, by default, the cost of the underlying funds is starting to come down, because I think a lot of workplace schemes and a lot of big employers are starting to realize this whole fugazi of active management and all these people in flashy suits coming in with the brochures and glossy and telling them everything's going to be great with their employees' money actually underperform the market in comparison to keeping portfolios simplified and ensuring that equity weighting is actually correct based on their employees' risk profile. I hope that's been a useful video on workplace pensions. If you have any questions or you'd like a free consultation and report from ourselves, head to the description below and find the calendar link to book a day and a time that is suitable for yourself. And as always, take care of your UK pension assets.